Writing. The room was filled with laughter when Marcus Vail extended his hand, but the laughter died the moment CEO Everett Langford looked at it and deliberately stepped back. For 3 seconds, Marcus stood there with his hands suspended between them, his face calm even though something inside him had just cracked. Around the polished conference table, executives avoided his eyes, pretending to study their folders while one investor shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Everett smiled as if nothing unusual had happened and continued talking about the company's future. What he did not know was that the black single father standing in front of him controlled the one decision that could determine whether his company received the largest investment of its history. And before the sun went down that afternoon, a $300 million funding deal would disappear. If you believe kindness matters, that people deserve respect regardless of their background, and that everyone deserves a second chance, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this story, and subscribe to Heartline Stories. Because sometimes the smallest act of disrespect can reveal the biggest lesson a person will ever learn. Marcus had not arrived at the glass tower that morning expecting revenge. He had arrived carrying a worn leather briefcase, a folder of financial projections, and a photograph of his 8-year-old son, Josiah, tucked carefully into the inside pocket. The photograph showed Josiah standing beside his father at a school science fair, both of them smiling beneath a paper banner that read, "Future Inventors." Marcus had raised the boy alone since his wife passed away years earlier. He knew what it meant to struggle quietly. There had been mornings when he dropped Josiah at school before sunrise, drove across town for meetings, and worked late into the evening before returning home to make dinner and check homework. He had built his investment firm from almost nothing, not because he wanted luxury, but because he wanted his son to grow up knowing that difficult beginnings did not have to become permanent endings. That morning, Marcus was invited to meet Everett Langford, the celebrated CEO of Langford Meridian Technologies. Everett's company had developed an ambitious infrastructure project that promised to transform several American cities, but the project needed enormous capital. Marcus's investment group had spent months reviewing the proposal. The numbers were impressive, the technology was promising, and the potential returns were extraordinary. After weeks of negotiations, Marcus had convinced a consortium of investors to prepare a $300 million funding package. The meeting was supposed to be the final step before the agreement was signed. Marcus entered the boardroom wearing a simple but perfectly tailored charcoal suit. Everett wore an expensive navy suit and sat at the head of the table as though the building belonged to him personally. Several executives smiled politely at Marcus, but one of them whispered something to another man and both laughed under their breath. Marcus noticed. He had learned long ago not to react to every insult. His father had once told him that dignity was not something other people could give or take away. It was something you carried with you. When Marcus approached Everett and extended his hand, the CEO looked directly at him, glanced at his hand, and then raised his own palm as if stopping a stranger from coming closer. He refused the handshake. The gesture was unmistakable. Everett then made a dismissive remark about keeping the meeting professional, and a few executives laughed. Marcus slowly lowered his hand. His eyes moved around the table and landed on the enormous presentation screen behind Everett. It displayed the words $300 million funding, strategic growth initiative. For a moment, Marcus stared at those numbers. Then he sat down. He did not argue. He did not insult Everett. He did not storm out. Instead, he opened his briefcase and quietly reviewed the documents. Everett began presenting the company's projections with confidence, speaking about expansion, market dominance, and record-breaking growth. But Marcus was no longer listening to the presentation. He was watching the people around the table. He saw employees who looked nervous. He saw executives who seemed uncomfortable with Everett's behavior but were too afraid to challenge him. And he remembered every person who had ever told him that success was about having power over others. Marcus finally understood something. He did not want to punish Everett. He simply could not place $300 million into the hands of someone who treated human beings as though their dignity depended on their position. Near noon, Marcus closed his folder. He explained that his investment group would not proceed with the funding agreement. The room became silent. Everett laughed at first, assuming it was a negotiating tactic. But Marcus calmly explained that the decision had nothing to do with the projected returns. It was about leadership, culture, accountability, and trust. A company asking for hundreds of millions of dollars from investors had to understand that money was not merely fuel for growth. It was responsibility. Everett's confidence disappeared. He insisted that Marcus was making an emotional decision. Marcus looked at him and said that sometimes an emotional decision was simply a moral decision that numbers could not explain. Then he stood, picked up his briefcase, and walked out. The news spread faster than anyone expected. By the following morning, other investors began asking questions about Langford Meridian's leadership. Two major partners paused their own commitments. Banks became cautious. Employees began quietly discussing the CEO's treatment of staff. Within weeks, the company's stock value plunged, several major contracts were reconsidered, and the ambitious expansion project was frozen. The company did not collapse because Marcus attacked it. It collapsed because the foundation had been weaker than everyone realized. Months later, Marcus received an unexpected letter from one of Langford Meridian's former executives. The man admitted that he had witnessed years of disrespect inside the company but had remained silent because he was afraid of losing his career. It told Marcus that the day he walked away from the $300 million deal had forced many people to finally confront what they had tolerated. Marcus never celebrated Everett's downfall. Instead, he established a new investment initiative focused on funding companies that valued ethical leadership, fair opportunities, and strong communities. One afternoon, he picked up Josiah from school and told him that sometimes walking away from money was harder than chasing it, but doing the right thing was worth more than any contract. Years later, Josiah would remember that lesson. He would remember his father's calm face, the closed briefcase, and the moment he chose dignity over $300 million. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Heartland Stories. Your engagement helps these stories reach people who may need a reminder that respect is never a small thing. And before you leave, make a special request to yourself: commit to treating every person you meet with dignity, especially when you have nothing to gain from doing so. Because you never truly know who is standing across the table from you, and sometimes the person you refuse to respect is the very person who could have changed your entire world.